world of others. You gotta love the mothers. And you gotta hug the ones who bring us joy and love. It's the middle with the moms, it's your day. I said, now this one's for the mothers. You gotta love the mothers. And you gotta hug the ones who bring us joy and love. It's the middle with the moms, it's your day.
Boom. Thank you for doing this. This is so
Of course.
cool. Like, I feel like you're like a famous person.
Gosh, definitely not. It's so funny because I actually kind of miss sometimes being anonymous
I
because I,
know.
I did a podcast the other day and someone quoted myself back to me and I was like, oh, that was weird. I
That's
don't, it's such
hilarious.
a surreal moment.
Yes. Well, I guess I just want to tell you just a little bit, about my podcast and about myself.
Mhm.
So I'm just a regular old mom. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. And where are you?
I'm in Virginia. I'm actually right
Virginia.
outside from DC. And same, just a regular old mom.
Okay, yes. And I, I have three kids, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Oh,
And
same.
really?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
hilarious.
Yeah.
So we know exactly what each other are going through.
Yes.
But I really struggle. I'm like, I've never struggled with depression and anxiety before, ever. And I never knew, about postpartum stuff. And I
Hmm.
really struggled with postpartum depression and anxiety.
Mm.
And I felt so not prepared for it
Hmm.
and didn't know anything. And so I felt alone in it.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to start, this podcast to help other people not feel alone because the more and more I talked to people about it, I mean, it was like everyone felt this
Yeah.
way. So I wanted to start this to bring people on to tell their stories because, every mom has a story
Hmm.
and just for people to not feel alone and feel like they
Yeah.
can, relate to people. And so now I took a year off. I had a baby
Hmm.
and I'm a wedding videographer and birth videographer. So I needed to, focus on those things and take a
Hmm.
break from this, but I am back and ready to get going on it. But I am newly into this journey of what would you say, I guess, the Maha mom. I've always, been, of course, focused on health and stuff like that. But wow, have just over the last few years, there's just been so much information available to us through social
Hmm.
media. So I'm newly into this and I'm newly into not being so fearful and learning the facts of, what's really going on.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of people that I know in the Memphis area, and I'm sure all over the country and world, we're scared to look and scared to find out. And, every time you turn on Instagram, there's a new reel with this is toxic, don't do this, don't do that. And it's so overwhelming.
Hmm.
So I decided, okay, well, with season 2 of my podcast, I want, these moms who are following along to let's take it one step at a time. Let's just focus on each thing and so that we don't get so overwhelmed and
Hmm.
anxious, but we have to know about these things for our kids, for these future generations. We
Hmm.
have to know what's going in their bodies, whether vaccines or food. And vaccines, I mean, that is really the biggest topic right now
It
with
is.
parenthood, or maybe
Hmm.
everywhere, after COVID. It's huge. So
It is.
I just
Yeah.
want to thank you so much for coming on this little podcast of mine
Mhm.
because I know you've done way bigger ones. And my friend, she she sent me your profile, and she actually it's very sad. She had a stillbirth at 39
Mm.
weeks,
Oh.
and she really started getting, she's not blaming vaccines, but she really started getting into this. And so
Mhm.
she sent me your Instagram, and wow, I was terrified. First of all,
Mm.
I didn't know even what an insert was, and I was terrified to look at it and to know what have I really, put in my kids' bodies. I'm I'm religious, so I prayed about it. I'm like, okay, well, I just got to take that next step and I just got to know and make better decisions for the future. But yes, so I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself. I read, your background, that you have a research background, and I would just love for you to introduce yourself and tell me a little about you.
Yeah, well, you just hit on million great points, and I just love that you have the bravery to vocalize your vulnerability. I think that's really hard to do, especially when we have been.
Okay,
Okay,
can you
there
hear
you
me
are.
now?
Yeah, I
It's
can. You
it
froze for a
stopped.
second.
Yes, it froze. I think you were talking about vulnerability.
Okay, yes. Well, first, I just want to say that you realizing that you are taking a step and realizing that there's so much that we aren't told, and we're kind of just forced into accepting products that we don't really know anything about. For you to acknowledge that, I just want to bravo to you. And I said this to somebody else, but it's really vocalizing your vulnerability is the first step, and to do that along with your podcast listeners is incredible. So thank you for what you're doing. I know you said earlier that I've been on bigger podcasts and coming on to the small podcast. Everybody is the same. Everybody
Yeah.
deserves informed consent. And I have said consistently that if anybody wants to talk about informed consent, I will be there. It doesn't matter what type of podcast you have, what category, anything. I've been on some like kind of like finance podcasts. I've been on some conspiracy podcasts. I've been on some, people that are very mainstream, and all of them I've had fantastic conversations because informed consent is a basic human right. Everybody deserves it. And I think from what I bring to the table is not necessarily the you have to accept these products in order to avoid death and disease complications, or you don't have to accept these products. I believe diversity is a strength in our nation when it comes to medical choice, and everyone is welcome, whether you accept, delay, or decline medical products. So going into why I am like that is because when I first started researching vaccines, it was when I was pregnant with my first child in 2019. I have three kids as well, five,
Yes.
3, and 1, which is hilarious
Yes.
that we're very similar. But when I first started researching, I just felt like everything was so polarizing. I went on Instagram, and then you see like the baby with a syringe in it, and then like a big no sign in black and white, and it was just very stark and kind of very dramatic, and it kind of shut off my brain to consuming any of that
Right.
information.
Right.
Even if it was true information backed by .gov
Yes.
sources, it wasn't something that I could mentally and emotionally process because of the fear-based mindset. So
Yes.
I go from it in the angle of, look, this is the information that the manufacturers and the government say about their products, and as an informed consumer, you have a right to know it. And I'll put it in an aesthetically pleasing manner because that's just what I would have wanted when
Yeah.
I first started researching. Um, but yeah, so I remember first starting to research this when I was pregnant, when I got the one-page sheet for the Tdap vaccine, which is given when women are typically in their third trimester. And I remember thinking, I'm not anti-vax, but this just kind of seems odd that you would give a
Right.
vaccine to a pregnant woman. And this was pre-COVID, so this was
Right.
before everybody started talking about this more on a national level. And I just started researching and finding the information, and I was shocked. I was shocked on what manufacturers said about their own products, and I was shocked about what .gov resources like the CDC, FDA, NIH not necessarily were saying on the main parts of their website, but when I started digging a little bit deeper, I started realizing that it was contradicting. And
Right.
the information wasn't exactly as well vetted when you start to look at the citations of things. And some of these comments that are on .gov resources that say this is absolutely safe, and then you look at the citation and it was a study from like the early 80s and
Right.
it says no reported case has been reported to the .gov agencies, and you're like, but this was in the 80s, this was a really long time ago.
Right. Right.
Is there anything since then? And so I just started digging. And the more that I dug, the more that I realized I was wrong. I had these preconceived notions about the industry, and I needed to have more information. And so I started posting all my information on my personal Instagram. I got heavily shadow banned. So I just prayed to God and asked for guidance on what to do. And He inspired me to start an account for Just the Inserts. And that's how it started. And I realized that I'm not alone. I mean, everything that you
No.
just described, every single parent I feel like has come on the precipice of that feeling, and
Yeah.
they've had to make the decision, am I going to dig my heels into the research? Am I going to jump in and try to be more informed? Or am I just going to blindly accept whether this community that accepts the product or rejects the product? I feel like neither of those are good. I don't think
Right.
you should ever make a medical decision based on somebody else's experience, based on somebody else's feelings about a product. And so that's kind of where I get attacked from all angles, where people will say, well, you've done this much research about the product. How could you say that people still have a right to accept it if they want to? And I said, well, that's what informed consent. Informed consent doesn't require us to all make the same decisions.
Right.
What works for you might not work for me, and what works for one community might not work for another community. And so I
Right.
think it's important for us to just have a more welcoming environment and more conducive environment for that diversity of choice. I cover more than vaccines though. I cover prescription pharmaceuticals, over-the-counter medications, and in every single post, my heart is always to be informing you of what the manufacturers and governments say, and everyone is welcome whether you accept, delay, or decline.
Right.
And then, I do start to talk about other parts of the industry because there are certain parts of the manufacturer inserts that are easily discredited by people if they don't know the historical context of why the inserts came about. So, in specific for vaccines, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 set up immunity for manufacturers to not be sued for serious injury or death for vaccines. That's really important to understand that manufacturers aren't held liable if you were to accept a product, accept that vaccine. They aren't responsible for any adverse reactions or death. Now, some people will say, yes, they are. But the only reason why they're able to have that immunity is if they are providing inserts, providing
Right.
direct warnings through the inserts. And that's why
Right.
it's so important to read the inserts. And, I talk about an example for the DTaP vaccine. That's the
Mm-hmm.
vaccine given to babies to prevent diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. It has sudden infant death syndrome as a known potential adverse reaction. And that's important for parents to know if they're accepting this product, the manufacturer and the FDA know this product has been tied to sudden infant death syndrome. And it's even more concerning that that product is administered at 2, 4, and 6-month-old babies, which according to the NIH is the highest rate of SIDS in America. And you were talking about earlier how you experience postpartum depression. I recently talked about this in an interview where the NIH also states that 1 out of 8 women experience postpartum depression or anxiety after having baby. And most of the products on the market for labor and delivery have anxiety or depression listed as potential
Wow.
adverse reactions. So that's really concerning too. If we have
Yeah.
a standard of care in America of products being used and the manufacturers and the FDA know that anxiety and depression can happen, and then we have 1 in 8 women dealing with that, that's a problem. And I always come from the angle of I have no definitive answers. I'm not saying that this is absolutely the cause of the current issues that we're having, but there's enough information that we should start asking more questions and we
Right.
should demand a higher level of scrutiny and transparency from our governments.
Absolutely. And that just all sounds like common sense to me. And it blows my mind the backlash that people like you, or anyone who ever even brings it up is getting. And, right now with the whole measles thing in Texas, these posts that I'm seeing, even though I am feeling this way now, are making me scared. I mean, it's
Mhm.
crazy. And one post I saw the other night, I feel like it's a lot of medical people who don't have kids, but not everybody, but the ones I'm seeing, they don't have kids. But they're threatening us saying, well, if you have a medical issue, then since your kid is not vaccinated, they shouldn't be helped or worked on. And
Yeah.
that is insane. And I know that that actually did happen during COVID. If
Mhm.
people went to the emergency room but they weren't vaccinated, people would refuse to work on them, and that is incredible. And are those people talking about how they were wrong about the COVID vaccine now?
Right.
Absolutely not.
It's horrible because especially what we know about the COVID vaccine, that it doesn't eliminate transmission.
Yeah.
And that same for MMR, one of the insert states a limitation of effectiveness section that that product might not protect every individual that accepts it. So knowing just that right there and then seeing the animosity towards people that exercise informed consent and opt out of that product is mind-blowing to me. And I don't think many of them realize, and this I'm speaking from personal experience and opinion here, I don't think many of them realize that they are hemorrhaging trust from the
Mm-hmm.
public,
Yeah.
and they will blame misinformation and they will blame accounts like mine.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm in my DMs and I'm super active in the comment sections. It's not that. It's
Right.
their interactions with people on social media, and then clinicians at, in the pediatrician level are dealing with ER, some of them medical professionals. It's their experience dealing with them
Right.
that creates that seed of distrust. And then
Right.
they go and find the potential financial conflicts of interest, and they start digging into this and realizing manufacturers are liable. And there was this one woman, she's a CPA, and she was telling me about this interaction she was having with her pediatrician. And she admittedly didn't really understand a lot about the insert. She hadn't done a ton of research, but
Yeah.
she had researched the industry and how it's set up. And she says, as a CPA, I cannot, in good conscience, accept these products because of how I know the industry is set up. It
Right.
didn't even matter to her if the products were safe and effective. It was the way the industry was set up that she was really cautious, because she sees that in other industries, how it can increase risk of corruption. And
Corruption. Yes.
yeah, and it sounds very conspiratorial, and I try not to touch too much on it because people will immediately shut off and not want to talk about it. But it
Yeah.
is true, as it's something that we need to be aware of. We saw this with the opioid crisis. We saw this with plenty of the weight loss drugs that have been pulled from the market,
Mm-hmm.
that have caused serious issues in our country. And a lot of people don't realize too that we still spend billions of dollars of taxpayer money to fix problems of pharmaceutical corruption in the past.
Right.
If you drive through, I'm in Virginia, and I go to West Virginia quite often. And if you drive through some of these communities, they have been decimated by the opioid crisis,
Oh
and
my
they're
gosh.
still dealing with. I mean, I've done mission trips in third world countries, and some parts of West Virginia look worse than some
Wow.
of these third world countries that I've
I
been through,
believe it.
especially when you drive through the mountains. It's heartbreaking. And so I think that's, as consumers, we have a right to be concerned about these potential corruption relationships and industry capture. And so I think that's why so many people were rallying behind Maha, rallying behind RFK, because we see it
Yep.
and we don't necessarily have the definitive answers, but we want at least someone to address it. And
Yeah.
when we're told, "Oh, you're just being crazy," that's not helping.
It's literally not helping. And I'm hearing things now like jokes saying, you're a conspiracy theorist, but then in 6 months it's the truth. I mean, it is so true. And with with the doctors, and you're talking about corruption, it's really sad because not every single doctor is bad. Not every
hmm
single doctor wants to just jab your kid, but they are taught these things. And with the corruption and just how money is in every single business, it's huge. I mean, isn't it true that they have to have a certain amount of patients get these vaccines for them to, I guess, keep being sponsored by them? I don't know if that's the right
Yeah.
words.
So in my book, I actually went through, because I got this question so often. I didn't really want to touch the topic with a 10-foot pole for the
Yeah.
longest time, but there were enough people in the medical community that reached out to me and talked to me about their personal experience. So they're called incentive
Incentive.
programs,
Yes.
and
Okay.
they don't, not every pediatrician opts into them. So
Right.
it's something, if they have decided to structure their business, their practice, their pediatric practice, um, to have that stream of income support them, then that is like clinician level. That might not be the case. So if you
Right.
go into your pediatrician's office and you say, well, you're making all this money off vaccines, that might not necessarily be true. It
Right.
depends on if they opt into the incentive program or not. And on a lot of these incentive programs are publicly available. I cite plenty of them in the book for you to go see. Okay, yes, this this incentive program, the pediatrician's panel size, which is another word for how many patients they have in their practice, a certain percentage of it has to be vaccinated for this product in order for them to be eligible for this bonus.
Right.
Or they'll say, for each vaccine that it's administered, you get this certain number of bonus, and you can total it to the end of the year. And I get some pediatricians that say, look, it's really expensive for us to house these vaccines. So actually, a lot of the times that bonus is being used for the cost of doing business, or because they have these incentive programs are through insurance companies, they have to have staff that can process all the insurance claims. So a lot of those incentives are going to pay for their staff. So yes and no. Like, some, it depends on their state, it depends on the
Yeah.
incentive program, it depends on the insurance company, and it depends on how they run their business, on whether
Right.
it's a super profitable um, avenue for them. But yes,
Hmm.
there's definitely some potential concern of, I mean, look at any affiliate product on the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah,
There's always
absolutely.
that concern. And I always find it really funny because I do, like, I'm going to acknowledge up front, I do have products on the website in the more, because I have the just the insert section of the website, which I don't charge for any of that. It's all for free. I have a free training course. I have all of my research
Okay, that's
publicly
awesome.
available, no email required to access. I do a free motherhood guide as well. And then I have like my just the alternative section of the website, and then I have an Instagram for that as well. And that's really just for the audience of people that want to delay or decline products, because
Okay.
I was getting so many messages of people saying, look, I've gone through this insert, I have a contraindication, or I'm too risk averse to accept this product. What are my options? And they felt
Right.
so isolated because they're told this false dichotomy that they have to accept this product. There's no other options, and they just felt mobilized. So then I started, through my own research, finding .gov and then some other health modalities that might help in certain disease prevention or treatment, or like medical conditions like acne or insomnia or things like that. And
Right.
so I created this other section, and within that section, I started getting companies asking, okay, we love what you're doing. We love informed consent. We'd love to provide a discount code. And so I do have affiliated products on that part of the website, but I do try to separate as much as possible.
Right.
So every now and again, I'll get people that'll say, "Oh, well, you have this affiliated product," and I'm like, I love that you're interested in financial conflicts of interest. Let's go ahead and discuss this part."
Yeah.
And then I'm like, yes, I completely agree. You also don't have to consume that.
Yeah.
That's separated on my website for you to
Yeah.
be able to consume whatever you want. But also, too, let's talk about the committee at the CDC, the committee that puts all of these vaccines on the CDC schedule. Most of them have financial conflicts of
Oh,
waivers
yes.
within the government, where they know that they have some kind of tie to a pharmaceutical company, and yet they are
Yes.
still able to vote on whether a vaccine gets added to the recommended schedule. And
Yeah.
so I love it when people bring that up, because they're like, yes, let's talk about financial
Yeah.
conflicts of interest. That's really important for you to be
Right.
aware of, because that does play into
Right.
how different people. But to answer your question, it's not across the board that
Right.
every single medical professional is out to get you. And I
Right.
actually think that there's more medical professionals out there, and it's growing, where they do value informed consent, because they themselves have seen the adverse reactions,
Right.
and many of them have been shamed or silenced into submission. And so they love the current environment. They love that
That's
patients
great
are
to
taking,
hear.
yes, a more active role. And I get tons of medical professionals that I'll say, hey, if you ever need any help, let me know. And so I'll send some of them my slides before I post them, and
Right.
they'll give me insight. Or there are most, if you go through my website where I have like the other interviews that I've done, I would say a good chunk of them are actually medical professionals that have
Right.
podcasts and have asked me to come on, because they were never taught this. They weren't
Right.
taught how to read or interpret manufacturer inserts. And even
Right.
though 99.9% of what I post is .gov stuff, they've never seen it. So
Right.
I appreciate all of them. And I'm doing a pro-informed consent provider directory now, and there are thousands of medical professionals that value informed consent. They're out there. You might have to go outside insurance networks, but they are out
Yep.
there.
Gosh, I have so much to say. First, with, these people who are voting in these vaccines in our children's vaccine schedules, it makes me so angry because I did not realize that that's how a vaccine schedule is made. And it is for everyone to see. who is getting paid all this money from these pharmaceutical companies? And it's disgusting. And it really bothers me, but that's a whole other thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is it's so sad that if people are saying, well, you're not in the medical field, you have absolutely no right to talk about this. You know, like you said, you're not putting out fear to people. You're not saying, oh my gosh, this is really bad, but you have to pay. So, read that.
Mhm.
You're giving stuff just for us to see. So that's incredible as well. But, I'm not in the medical field at all, but I am 1000% allowed to research these things, read the inserts, which I would love for you to define inserts for people who are new into this because I had no idea what that was. But we're allowed to do this for our children, and every single person in this world's body is different. Every single kid is going to react differently. Some kids might have absolutely no reaction to this, but I wish that every pediatrician could spend more time on the child in the appointment, could learn their bodies and what will work best for them, decide if they need this vaccine dependent on where we live or what the parents have, stuff like that. I wish that every single child had this option for a pediatrician to do this. And they're not taught that it's about money, it's about quick, you feel this way, let's get some Tylenol, but you're not addressing the actual problem. And with my experience, I had a daughter in 2019, and I've always been, serious about health and what's going into my body. I felt like I was serious, but I would eat a whole entire box of M&Ms, not knowing how terrible, the food dyes are. I told you that I was pretty much feared into the vaccines. I had no idea. Like, they gave me a packet at the pediatrician's office, and it talked about each vaccine that your kid's getting. So that was my research to me. And, me and my husband read it, and we were like, we feel good about it, we feel good about these. And I still had this weird feeling in my gut, but I was like, it's just scary because, it's your child getting a shot. And, we went and did it. And I'll say I'm blessed that my daughter did not have any reactions, but like you, I quickly got pregnant again and had a son. And actually, I think is it the Tdap that you get when you're pregnant?
Mhm.
So this is how crazy and fearful like I was. I made anyone who came to meet her in the first few weeks of their life get it.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
and
It's
they
called
did.
cocooning.
Yes, and my parents, my in-laws, and some of my friends got it. Oh, I feel terrible about it now, but then with my son, he's a completely different kid than my daughter is. And, I just wanted to blindly go into it. I didn't want to think about it. So, she would get her vaccines. I just wouldn't think about it again. Well, with my son, that wasn't possible because I didn't write. I wish I wrote down every single one, but I have like a diary, and I wrote down that every time he gets one or every time I go to the doctor's office, he is angry, he's fussy, and he's a
Mhm.
baby. And I just said he has colic. He has colic. But I truly believe now he did not have colic. I think he had some serious reactions to it. And luckily, they weren't as, it could have been worse. But, severe eczema, severe eczema. And I don't know when it didn't, he wasn't born with it. It showed up, I would say, probably a year or so after he, was born, and it was severe. And I'm just panicking. I'm trying to do everything I can because he's suffering with it. And so, I'm changing all this stuff, but now reading into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the inserts or look at the facts of how vaccines can cause eczema. And, we're in an autoimmune disease crisis. What's going on? Like, there's nothing wrong with me and you having this conversation right now and just
Mhm.
trying to get to the bottom of it. And sometimes I feel a little hopeless because I'm a nobody over here. I'm not in the medical field. No one's going to listen to me. But I hope that, like you, I can, wake people up in this stuff and really think about what's best for your child. But back to my second son, I'm very blessed that nothing crazy, happened, that he, didn't have a serious reaction because I've had friends whose child has literally stopped breathing from vaccines. And when I heard that, I had a friend bring it up to me on a podcast, actually. I panicked. I was like, I can't post this. Like,
Mm.
I'm not comfortable because I have vaccinated my kids. Oh my gosh. But she told me the story and her baby stopped breathing and
Mm.
but started again, brought her baby to the pediatrician. Like, oh, it's fine. That's normal. No, that's not normal. But, my son now, and I have another son, obviously, I have a
Mm.
third child. They suffered with ear infections.
Mm.
All three of my kids had to have surgery, remove tonsils, tubes, and adenoids in 1 month last year. We were just suffering. I'm like, I felt hopeless. What can I do? And so that's when I was like, all right, I really got to just go ahead and dive into vaccines because I feel like I'm doing everything right in my house. I'm, washing their clothes correctly. We're going outside, we're opening the, windows and doors. Like what else? We're eating correctly. What else can I do? And wow, like really reading the things and opening my eyes and listening to people talk about it, I just was done. And when I had my third child, I went into the pediatrician's office, terrified, but ready to finally ask a question. Ask, what is this vaccine that he's getting today? Blah, blah, blah. And when I did, wow, what a terrible reaction I got from our pediatrician. I was by myself with the three kids. So I had a newly 3-year-old and a 4-year-old with me, and then my newborn. And she said in front of my kids, she was so frustrated that I asked this. The only reason you're asking this is because of the whole COVID vaccine thing. Like, you're not getting the COVID vaccine. You have to get these vaccines or he will die.
Oh
She
my
actually said that. And I had heard people talk about that, and I'm like, no way a doctor would really say that. She said that. And my kids are sitting right there with me. And so I was like in my head, like, okay, I'm done. Obviously, but I was still nervous and just like, okay, well, we're gonna hold off today. Um, and after that, the nurse comes in and I guess draws some blood. Like, I don't know if it's from his leg, I can't remember his finger. And I'm thinking, I don't remember any newborn like visit doing this. And so, but I'm just blindly trusting them. And then she goes back and looks at the chart and is like, I just did a blood test for a 9-month-old. What was I thinking? I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
I literally felt so sick. I'm like, don't ever touch my freaking kid again. I didn't say that, but I was like sick to my stomach. I'm like, what if you gave him the wrong vaccine? Like, I don't know.
Right. And that happens. I mean, I get messages
Oh,
of that all the time of someone saying, "Oh, they were meant to get this vaccine, but they got this one and it's for 65-year-olds and oh, it's a
oh
high
my,
dose and it happens. People don't realize and nurses tell me this too because I hate to say it because um I know there's really great nurses out there,
yeah,
but there is a community of nurses that were trained during COVID and they weren't in person and they were all online. And
right.
the older nurses are starting to see some really, really concerning things in the younger generation
Yeah,
that they just didn't get the training that they
right,
should have just in simple things like
right.
administration errors, which I don't really focus on administration errors because I would assume and have the hope that the medical professionals would know which vaccine they're giving. But I've
Yeah.
seen a huge uptick in people getting the wrong vaccines, and that
Wow.
is terrifying. Absolutely
Terrifying.
terrifying to me. I'm so sorry all of that happened because it's not okay. That's not
No.
how the patient and provider relationship should be. That's not informed consent. That's called medical coercion. And it's hard because as a mom, when you're dealing with eczema, I know that people just kind of think that eczema is a rash. It's not. It is such a time-consuming and mentally, emotionally, physically draining experience as a parent because you see
Yeah.
your child suffering. My son actually struggled with eczema. So none of my kids have been vaccinated, but that doesn't mean that like they still don't deal with issues. They still have
Right.
sensitivities. But my son has eczema and we've dealt with that before. And we have to be very strict with his diet as well, like no dairy or gluten, because that seems to be triggers for him. But um, when I start to see people that kind of disregard all of these known adverse reactions of, well, at least it's not polio, well, at least it's not
Yes.
whooping cough, and it's like, wait, hold on a second. You don't understand some of these adverse reactions have complications to them that
Yeah.
can completely change your life as a parent and change
Yeah.
your child's life. Like my son was in onesies for the longest time because we didn't want him scratching his legs because they would
Yes.
scratch so much that it would
Yes.
bleed. And you
Same.
have to like, I mean, we've not gone on vacations because we've had to spend, hundreds of dollars on certain ointments or creams
Yep.
or baths or herbs or tinctures and all these other things. It's a huge investment to deal with these adverse reactions. So
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of these medical professionals and quote unquote science communicators are failing too. And I'm trying to communicate to them and give them advice like, look, if you want to be more effective in your public health messaging, you need to start considering how treacherous some of these adverse reactions are for parents, especially in the modern age.
Yeah.
Um, that like especially when we start to talk about seizures. I have a friend, her newborn had all these different types of seizures, or
Oh,
you start talking about colic. A lot of times colic is from brain inflammation, which is
wow.
encephalitis, which is listed on most of the newborn inserts. And then real quick, you asked me to define
Yeah.
inserts. So
Yes.
inserts are basically just labeling.
Okay.
It's the manufacturer. So like if you were to get like a new blow dryer or a new espresso machine or something, the folded up pieces of paper that
Yeah.
you get, like make sure you don't plug this into the wrong outlet
Right.
or your house will blow up, or
Right.
like make sure you don't put any delicate fingers or appendages into this product or it'll get cut off. Basically,
Right.
it's very similar to like that for manufacturer inserts
Okay.
of pharmaceutical products. The manufacturer goes through like these are the conditions that might predispose you to an increased risk to an adverse reaction. Like if you have an allergy or if you have a certain medical condition, this might increase your risk. And for the DTaP vaccine, it actually says that if your child has had one dose of the DTaP vaccine and they cried for more than 3 hours, it's a sign that if they get another dose of the DTaP vaccine, that they could be at a more increased risk for adverse reactions. And so
Oh,
as parents, we aren't told this.
yeah.
And it's hard too because pediatricians, the average pediatrician appointment is less than 10 minutes. And so
Yeah.
that's not enough time for them to sit with you and to understand everything that you know about your child.
Right.
And they kind of, I've seen in my own experience with pediatricians, because I've gone through a plethora of them trying to find the right healthcare for my family. Many of
Right.
them will discredit your own observations, which is
Mm-hmm.
unscientific. Like you
Yes.
have the most anecdotal experience for your child. No matter how much time that medical professional has spent in school and how they've dedicated most of their adult life to the medical profession, they still do not have
Right.
enough anecdotal experience for your specific child and your family and your history than you do. And so I
Right.
think it's really important for us to kind of walk into that authority and walk into
Mm-hmm.
that responsibility to be able to communicate those observations. And I'm actually working on tons of people. I used to do t-shirts a few years ago, and tons of people have been asking me to bring them back. And I'm actually working with a designer right now
Oh,
because
cool.
I'm going to make this one that says a mother's instinct is data. When we
Yes. I
start to
love
look
that.
at that mother's instinct, there's actually biological events that occur when you become a mother. There are certain hormones that are increased in mothers where we can be more observant to temperature changes in our
Yes.
children. We're more observant to changes in their voices, changes in their demeanor. And I see this all the time with my husband. I know when my kids have a fever. I can just tell by putting my hand up
Same.
to their, and my husband's like,
Yes.
they're fine.
I
And
can
of
look
course,
at them
like,
and
yeah.
know.
And then a few hours later, of course, they start coughing. And I was telling somebody else, like, I can tell the way that my son swallows if he has a sore throat. I have that
Yeah.
instinct. And it's actually, there's a biological reason that mothers have that because our
Wow.
hormones are different levels than other people around us. So that's all data. That's all really important when we're looking at how we diagnose our children. And then based on that diagnosis, what products are recommended or any lifestyle changes or things that we need to address nutrition levels. All of that's really, really important. And if the medical professional walks into that office thinking that they are the authority over that child, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's where you've experienced it. I've experienced it. I'm sure many people listening right there, right now, are nodding their heads because they feel the same way too. They've been in that. And for me, it was my daughter, my firstborn, was actually injured by the synthetic vitamin K injection.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was colic and she had eczema and jaundice, severe jaundice. And she had neonatal acne. And there were just like a slew of issues that we dealt with her
Wow.
gut and her liver. And I remember going to different pediatricians trying to basically beg them to help me because I knew that she was in pain, and the entire time they were scolding me for not vaccinating. And they wouldn't even address
Which would
the
make it
tiny
way worse because it's going to
right.
destroy her microbiome in her gut.
Exactly. And so I dealt with I had this one male nurse block the door and wouldn't let me leave until I signed a declination form. I've had pediatricians tell me that my daughter needed to get the Hep B vaccine because if I had a great Uncle Albert kiss her with dry cracked lips and he had undiagnosed hepatitis B. And I'm like, "Wait, are you kidding me? Like this is the example that you're." And that's where I go back to when it kind of reminds me of like the affiliate
Right,
products. It's like this doesn't even stand to reason when you
right,
actually are like from a business perspective, this does not make sense. And so it just, I've said this before too, like it wasn't me that left that environment. It was that environment forced me to leave. Like I
right,
would love to go to the pediatrician down the road for me, but
right.
unfortunately they don't honor informed consent and they don't honor parental choice. And so
Yep,
as a parent, I have a responsibility and stewardship over my children. And so I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to find, and I did, I found an amazing medical doctor. She had a pediatric practice for 2 decades. Her nephew experienced an adverse reaction to a vaccine. And so she started a family medicine practice and she doesn't even offer it to her patients. She doesn't even have it on the premises. And she says, look, if you want it, that's fine, but go to a CVS, go to a Walgreens.
right,
I'm
right,
not going to administer them. So I learn a lot from her too. And it's really interesting because when you start talking about this, people will say, well, medical professionals have spent all this money and they've been in training and stuff like that. But then when they are presented with a medical professional that has changed their minds, they are
right,
automatically discredited as anti-vax. And
right.
so there's no allowance for intellectual curiosity. There's no
Yeah,
allowance to say, what if this medical professional has had decades of experience, is an expert in their field? They start to question the effectiveness or safeties of these products, and all of a sudden, their expert advice is no longer applicable because they start to question this product.
right.
That's not right. That's not
That's
okay.
insane. It truly is insane. And they will just gaslight you and trick you into thinking that. And I just want to say, like, I am nowhere near anti-medicine. I mean, it's called the practice of medicine because
Hmm.
every single body's different. Everyone's going to react differently to things. And it's incredible. I mean, I'm very Christian and I say God, gave these people the ability and the smarts to develop things to like surgery and stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
medicine has saved probably all of our lives in one way. So
Yeah.
I'm nowhere near anti-medicine. I just am here for transparency. And like I said, it's okay to have these conversations. And right now, before we got on, I was listening to a Tucker Carlson podcast with this doctor on here who was a general surgeon for years and years. And he's being banned because he's noticed the decline in new surgeons' education and their levels and their confidence and the way they're doing surgery. And that is terrifying. And they're banning him for from whatever group it is just because he's questioning it. And the facts are there, the statistics are there. I don't know, it's just crazy. That's a whole other thing, but it's just scary. And
It
so
is.
talking about it is the best thing we can do. And man, would I love for vaccines to have all these great ingredients and do exactly what they're supposed to do. But like you said, look at the inserts at what it says. It's
Hmm.
just terrible. And I watched this video. I can't remember the man's name, but he's part of the Maha movement, with RFK. And, he said that, and it was in 2017, he said that they say 1 in a million kids have an adverse reaction. And that is so not true. Like,
Hmm.
they're not reporting it. Some parents aren't reporting. I didn't report it. I didn't know that he was having an adverse reaction. So that's scary in itself. And I mean, is it true that there are actually like no studies on these vaccines, no trials and stuff like, right? Is that true?
So it depends on your definition of a safety study.
Okay.
What you and me would consider a safety study is probably not the equivalent of what actually has been done. If you look at some of these inserts in the section 6.1 under adverse reactions, it's typically called clinical experience. They will talk about all of the clinical trials, so all of the safety testing that's been done before the vaccine is brought to market. And unfortunately, in a lot of those sections, it will say that the placebo that was used in the control group is actually either the same vaccine administered at a later date or another vaccine. And
Right.
so that's really concerning, right? Because when we look
Yes.
at the results from those studies, we would assume that the control or the placebo is an inert substance like a saline injection or like, in other places in pharmaceutical products, it's like a sugar pill or something like that.
Right.
But when it's the same vaccine or it's another vaccine with the same ingredients, then that information is going to be very flawed. And that's why I
Right.
really focus on section 6.2, which is the post-marketing adverse reaction section. Those are the adverse reactions that are reported after a vaccine has gone to market. I focus on that because that's when the product's in the general public. And according to the CDC, rare or delayed adverse reactions might not be evident until millions of people accept that product. So there were plenty of people when the RSV vaccines and antibody came out, I think in, what was it, 2023, they kept asking me for my advice or my asking for comment on it. And I was like, look, this product's brand new on the market. And
Yeah.
many of these products are administered to populations that haven't been studied, pregnant women or children,
Right.
young children. And so I can't really provide comment because there's no data yet. And I
Right.
was waiting for that post-marketing adverse reaction section to be populated in order to do a post on it. And I kind of said, look, I'm not saying this to scare you, but you are an uncontrolled test subject if you accept this
Yes.
product. So if you do accept this product, I'm not shaming you for accepting it, but if you do accept it, please register to the pregnancy registry with the manufacturer, with the government. So if you do experience adverse reactions, then those can be added to the inserts after the fact. Because like you said, many of them are underreported, and there was actually a federally funded study that found less than 1% of adverse reactions for vaccines are reported. And so when we start to, I
Wow.
see a lot of people that are just trying to make sense and they want to say, okay, well, what's the percentage of risk for complications to this disease, and what are the percentage of risks for these adverse reactions? But we don't know because um, medical professionals aren't taught that there could be adverse reactions. So if they think it's an impossibility, why would they report adverse reactions? Also, many of these adverse reactions might not be seen by the pediatrician. So say you accept a vaccine later on that day, your child stops breathing, has a seizure, has some kind of issue, turns blue. You're going to go to the ER. You're not going to go to
Right.
your pediatrician if they're not
Right.
open. You might call them and let them know, but typically you'll go to the ER, and most of the time they're not reporting the adverse reaction, or the ER expects the pediatrician to report it, and then so it gets lost.
Yeah.
And then, you have people that say, oh, well, I don't trust vaccine adverse event reporting system, that's VAERS, because parents can report adverse reactions. And for some reason, they think that that's not as valid as if a medical professional does. But if a medical professional isn't reporting it, then the parent needs to,
Right.
or the
Right.
caregiver. And so it's just really messy. I
So
personally
messy.
think that the passive reporting system is very flawed. I think that we need a complete overhaul of it. It needs to be, it's so interesting because most of the medical industry has been so streamlined and efficient, but that part hasn't been.
Right.
So I think that that's a big thing that the medical community, if they want to encourage trust and transparency with the public, they need to implement a way better, more efficient, more comprehensive safety surveillance system for adverse reactions for vaccines. Because based on my DMs, it happens all the time.
Oh my gosh, all the time. And, it's a very vulnerable topic to talk about, like we said. And, I've done a few of my episodes the past couple weeks, and almost every single person has kind of tiptoed and asked me a little bit about a vaccine. I'm not, do you want to go there? And then we end up talking for an hour or so, and people are waking up, but also people are sharing the adverse reactions that's happened to their kids. Um, I want to ask you, just for those, new into this, what is informed consent? What does that entail?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, informed consent, according to the American Medical Association's Code of Medical Ethics, it's when you, as a patient or a parent, receive all the information and ask all the questions you need to make an informed medical decision. So, I personally am biased. I think that's the manufacturer inserts. I think we should know what manufacturers say about their own products, the ingredients in the product, any known risks for the product. Does this product actually work? There's plenty of sections, like I said before, where they say not everybody vaccinated will be protected. Unfortunately, they don't give too much more information beyond that. They just kind
Right.
of say kind of hit or miss if you're going to be protected or not. And there are subsequent studies that could be done. Unfortunately, a lot of them are much smaller and funded by the manufacturers or some other pharmaceutical entity. So that can be kind of hard to trust if it's not this unbiased objective source. But yeah, so you being able to read the manufacturer inserts, understand and interpret the information based on the studies or the information that I've cited from the FDA. The FDA actually has a robust section talking about manufacturer inserts, and I have a free training course on my website called How to Read an Insert, and I go step by
Okay.
step. I take screenshots of that FDA resource and say, okay, this is the contraindication section. What's a contraindication? A contraindication is a condition, a medical condition that might predispose you to an increased risk for an adverse reaction. So, according to the
Wow.
FDA
Okay.
and CDC, if your child has this contraindication, they should not accept this product. They should not get
Wow.
vaccinated. That isn't really discussed at large.
No.
So it's important for parents to know that.
Yes. Wow.
Um, so actually, you can kind of see it a little bit in the measles discussion we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
There, when you see like, okay, well, the MMR can't be given to pregnant women. That's a contraindication. It's in the insert that pregnant women shouldn't get the MMR because it's a live vaccine. It can cause issues for the baby. And so understanding that section is important. There's also warning and precautions sections. So these might not necessarily be like, yes, absolutely don't accept this product, but hey, we do know that there's an increased risk for this, so you should be aware in case you might be predisposed to seizures or you might be,
Okay.
fainting, or, if you do faint, make sure that there are anti-fall procedures whenever you accept this product so you don't fall and hit your head,
Right.
on a table or anything like that. And then as you go through, I kind of teach that there are certain disclaimers in manufacturer inserts that the product hasn't been tested for cancer-causing agents or mutagenesis, which is like affecting your DNA
Right.
or affecting your fertility. Many of these products
Right.
haven't been tested for that, which is,
Yeah.
again, I'm not trying to say that correlation equals causation, but in order to have causation, you need to have correlation. And what are we dealing with right now?
Yeah.
We're dealing with a boom of cancer. We're dealing with a boom of autoimmune issues. And so
And
it's just
infertility.
infertility. And so it's just one of those things of, okay, if we know that these products are given and we know that a bulk of Americans are accepting it, I can't remember what we're at right now nationally, but we're in like the 80s to 90% range of vaccine coverage. If we know that and we have all these other issues and these products haven't been tested, why not just test them?
Yeah,
Why not just ask the
exactly.
question? Is it
Exactly.
so hard to at least ask that as
Exactly.
consumers to ask that? And that's where I come in. And again, I get attacked from so many different angles, but I'm like, no, 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 this is just you being an informed consumer. Like when we go to research a vacation, we research everything about where we're going to
Yep.
go, the flight we're going to take, the hotel we're going to stay at, the car we're going to rent, or when we go buy a car, we research all this stuff about the
Yep.
car. How many seats does it have? How much gas mileage? What's the safety rating? Like this is just
Common
part,
sense.
yes, it's just a part of any other product on the market. Vaccines are medical products, and you have a right to research them.
Yeah. And there actually was, I think, a group of moms who had vaccinated kids and unvaccinated kids, like a small number compared to the country, actually did some kind of study and test and had results for it and presented it to our government, and they just denied it and wouldn't even look at it. That's absolutely insane because they say, it's unethical to do a study on, children. Well, of course, we're not going to say, okay, take this kid and vaccinate him on purpose. No, but people are accepting these vaccinations. So let's take those kids and then let's take these unvaccinated kids and then do a study. Like, that's just common sense. And let's save humanity and make our future generations not have to struggle and go through all this terrible stuff that is affecting our lives. Something as simple as you said, eczema has really affected our life, has affected my son's life. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about, you said your daughter had a reaction to vitamin K, and you said synthetic, which I love because I didn't know it was synthetic until I think I saw one of your stories or something. But why on earth are we having a brand new baby come into this world and we're putting these things in their body? Like, oh my gosh. And I did it with all three of my kids, and I just want to punch myself like, oh, Like,
Well,
why are we doing that?
we do it because we want to protect our children. And the information that we're given is we're told that in order to prevent vitamin K deficiency bleeding, the brain bleeds, in order to prevent them, we need to accept this product. Unfortunately, the people that are telling us this might not know that the manufacturer lists severe complications to accepting this, potentially accepting this product. And so, one of the things that just got updated in the manufacturer inserts for the synthetic vitamin K injection is, if you are going to accept that product, to make sure you get the preservative-free version, because now the manufacturer knows the benzyl alcohol in the preservative version can lead to gasping syndrome in neonates and babies. And
Ugh,
so that's important for you to know. And I've talked to a few L&D nurses, labor and delivery nurses, and I've said, "Do you know about this? Do you know that this is updated manufacturer guidance?" They have no clue. And so that's why I focus so hard on informing the consumer, informing the parent and the patient, because your medical professional might not be given updated information, and that's
right,
truly a flaw and failure of the educational system for medical professionals. And that's why I say, like, I value all the medical professionals in the community because they're giving me all this insight, but also too, many of them value me because they're not told this information, even
right,
though it's sitting on .gov websites. But I think, and this is important too, because like I've been there. We make the best decisions we can with the information we have. And so it's hard when we look at all this in hindsight and realize, oh my gosh, what did I accept for my baby? But we can't live in that bitterness because it'll only
right,
consume us. And we just make the best decisions that we can going forward. And that's why I work so hard on what I do, because I don't want other parents feeling that guilt and living in that kind of shame. And so have that information up front. So if you do accept that product, you're observant to any adverse reactions.
right,
You can expedite treatment, you can eliminate diagnostic confusion, and maybe you can make better, more informed decisions for your specific situation in the future. But also try not to live in that and dwell in that
right.
that guilt and shame, because I, like I've said, I've been there, and it just
Mm-hmm.
robs you of the present. It robs you from being able to be the mother that you need to be for your children today, and just use it as a tool to make better decisions for yourself in the future.
Right. And couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. Sorry, I'm just talking your ear off,
No,
but
you're
I
fine.
everything you're saying, and just I really appreciate it. I just want to say, being new into this and starting to have these open conversations, it's kind of like, grew up Catholic. I told you I'm Christian, and I'm really new into talking about my relationship with God and Jesus with friends. My husband and I are really getting into it, and I love it. But it is the most vulnerable thing I feel like you can talk about. And now vaccines also is. And so, especially with this measles things going and everyone sharing all this stuff and talking about misinformation, because it's like, who do you believe? And it's so scary. What advice would you give us moms who are just wanting, just like me, who just want to have a conversation about it and want to kind of open people's eyes? And in no way, shape, or form am I going to judge a mom and be like, oh my God, you're going to give them a vaccine. Like, you need to stop. Like, I would absolutely never do that. I just want them to hear these conversations. And, I might get some backlash. I have some medical community friends, and I've never talked to them about this stuff. I've never talked to them what my pediatrician has told me, what my son has gone through. And what advice would you just give moms who, might be in a conversation with someone? Like, what advice would you give them? What should we say?
Well, I have a section in my free training course called How to Have Productive Conversations About
Oh, awesome.
Medical
Okay.
Products, and I also have it in my book. But in the aspect of moms, I think we just need to go into an understanding that every single mom out there just wants to do the best for their kid. They just want
Yes.
to do best by them and their community. And I think that many of us just eat each other alive because we see the potential issues of one decision or another, and we attack the mom and assume bad intentions on the mom. And I don't think that's a healthy place to be. And I see this from all angles.
Yeah.
Um, and I think assuming good motives for the other person is just right off the bat a good, healthy
Right.
thing to do when you
Right.
want to engage in conversation. And then identifying their fears. I mean, most of these decisions are fear-based. So
Mm-hmm.
understanding, is this fear of a disease? Is this fear of a complication from a disease? Is this fear of upsetting your pediatrician or upsetting a family member? Because those are two different things. Fear of a
Right.
disease, the answer to that and the conversation is going to go a lot different than if you fear upsetting someone. That's rooted in more of what I call consumer guilt, and it's that feeling of I don't want to inconvenience anyone, I don't want to offend anyone. And that's very different than
Right.
like you accepting a product or not accepting a product because you don't want to offend someone. To me, is like a lack of boundaries, and you probably need to focus more on your authority and your responsibility that you have as a mother and as a parent over your child. So maybe like having those kind of exploratory questions of like, what are your fears? What are you genuinely concerned about? Let's talk about them. Let's research
Right.
them together. And I used to have this huge long list on my notes app on my phone of all these different resources that I would kind of just send someone if they started asking questions. And I
That's
started
literally me right
realizing,
now.
well, I started realizing that it was kind of overwhelming. And
Yes.
so I kind of have started to more, if I know the personality of the person and I know how they learn or how they appreciate to learn, I will just pick and choose which things that I send
Yes.
to them so then it can resonate deeper for them and they're not overwhelmed. I
Yes.
actually just did a webinar with Moms Off the Record podcast. The ladies there,
Okay.
they're amazing. And it was talking about productive conversations and I went through the things that happen when we're overburdened with information and our brain
Oh,
actually shuts off.
yes.
Our short-term memory shuts off, our ability to remember the information and to encode it properly is completely disabled. And so for me, like whenever I have friends or something, because I talk about it a lot on just the inserts, but I'm pretty chill in
Yeah.
person. Like I have friends that vaccinate, I have friends that
Yeah.
don't vaccinate, so I'm pretty like I don't push that on
Yes.
anybody.
Yes.
And so but if somebody starts to like ask questions, I'll be like, "You know what? I watched this documentary, I listened to this podcast, I read this on the FDA website. I would love your perspective on it. I would
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on it because what that communicates is you care about enough the subject that you've done some research on it, and then you care enough about that person that you want their perspective on it, and it gets them they're more inclined to research it because they realize that you're invested in it and then you're invested in their perspective.
Right.
And that kind of puts a lot of people more at ease
Right.
because there are certain times where I've been in a situation I don't want to talk about vaccines because I talk about it
Yeah.
all the time
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
bring it up and then you start to get uncomfortable and you're like,
Yes.
oh, well, how are they going to take this? And especially
Yes.
when I was anonymous, I was like, oh, they're going to figure
Oh,
out that I'm the,
yes.
who I am. And hopefully now the culture is being a little bit more open and respectful. I have seen a big shift, but there can be some backlash. So just understanding that it's not you, it's the information that they're being presented a lot of times
Right.
that they're upset with. And so as long as you're going into it in truth and love and grace, hopefully
Yes.
those seeds will be planted and you can have and also too that it's not just a one-time discussion. It might be a journey that you
Right.
go through together.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm, wanting to do. And this episode is huge for my friends. So I'm just so thankful that you did this. I would love for people to find your Instagram. I know it's just the inserts, but what is your book called?
It's called Well Considered, a handbook for making informed medical decisions. And
Okay.
I had it here a second ago. I don't know where my kids did with it. They call it the Apple book. But
Oh,
I have everything at justtheinserts.com.
okay, that is awesome. I'm right now listening to an audiobook of Callie and Casey Means' book, Good
Oh, great.
Energy.
Yeah,
Have
good
you listened
energy.
or read that one?
I read the first half of it and I have so many books that I want to read and then I kind of put it down and I forget and then I move on to another book, so I need to do a better job at finishing it. But the first half, oh my gosh,
I'm
it's
only on the first half as
incredible.
well. It is so good and so eye-opening and a little overwhelming because of all the information, like you said. And then it's like you black out at one point
Right.
because it's too much information. Hello, little cutie down
She's
there.
trying to sneak, but she's not very good
I
at
love it. Oh my
it.
goodness. Well, I cannot thank you enough for doing this and taking the time out of your day. I can't wait to go and just bury myself in your website and get your book. And I hope all my listeners can come out of this not feeling stressed out. Just take a deep breath, say a prayer, and just go one step at a time with this. And this was amazing. So seriously, thank you so much. And maybe one day I can have you back on and we can talk about something else.
Absolutely. I could talk for hours and hours and hours. So thank you for having the bravery to talk about it. And I truly hope that all the resources, bless everybody who comes across it, and just realizing that we're all just trying to do the best that we can.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you for paving the way for us, because that's what you've done. I think you've helped start a revolution over here. So it's
well,
awesome.
There's many before me, but I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.